Mark Dyreson is a sport historian from the Pennsylvania State University. He has published more than 50 journal articles and book chapters. His book, Making the American Team, Sport Culture, and the Olympic Experience, is the definitive work on American involvement in the early years of the Olympic movement. Mark earned his doctorate in history at the University of Arizona. He's a past president of the North American Society for Sport History. He's been a visiting fellow in Japan for the Organization of American Historians and the Japanese Association of American Studies. And he has presented invited lectures at universities all over the world. So we're very happy to have him here today, and I'll bring Mark up now.
Thanks, Wayne. I know he said lecture, but don't panic. I'm going to go short, so I won't lecture you. It's nice to be here today. It's, I think, 2 degrees in State College, so I'm really happy to be here. We're just wrapping up a conference on the legacy of the LA84 Games that Wayne Wilson and LA84 and Matt Llewellyn and John Gleaves of California State University Fullerton put together, and look in the next year or so in the International Journal of the History of Sport. If you're interested, there will be some dynamic papers from really good scholars, about a dozen or so who gathered here yesterday and today. So I'm happy about that. So without further ado, what I want to do briefly in talking about legacy, and before I start or give a little introduction to the legacies of the 1984 LA Games, I want to make an attempt to tackle an even larger quarry. The legacy not just of LA84, but the Olympics in general in American culture. For more than a century now, the Olympics have been an important element in American imaginations. A seemingly self-evident assertion, everybody buys that, right? That in some ways is more surprising than it initially seems. The Olympics have been and still are immensely popular in the U.S., in spite of the fact that they rarely showcase sports that under normal circumstances captivate American audiences, right? Football, as our center knows, the version at least that we know as football, has played no role whatsoever in the Olympic Games, American football, with one exception. Guess where? In the LA Coliseum in 1932, the organizers held a college football game, pitting an Eastern squad, Harvard, Princeton, and Yale players, against a Western squad of USC, Cal, and Stanford players against one another in the only American football game ever held in the Olympics. This contest mystified and stupefied most foreign observers who filled the Coliseum, guaranteeing, in spite of rumblings from the NFL and Roger Goodell, that you don't have to worry about the most popular spectator sport in the contemporary U.S. ever darkening an Olympic program again. That was a one-time thing. Baseball. Certainly a more global offering than American football. It appears as an official demonstration sport of all places 4 years after the 32 LA Games in Berlin. A team of American all-stars played one another in the Olympic Stadium before a crowd of 110,000, at the time considered the biggest audience ever to watch a baseball game live. Once again, they mystified and stupefied the mostly German audience. Baseball had a little more traction, though, as an Olympic sport. It would have been a centerpiece had Tokyo held the 1940 Games in Japan. It eventually comes back to Los Angeles in '84 as a demonstration sport, a medal sport in Seoul. But as you know, it's gone away again, and I don't think baseball's coming back to the Olympic program. Basketball, that's the big three, the trinity of American national pastimes. That's been the most successful import of American pastimes onto the Olympic program. It appears in Berlin in '36 and has been there ever since. But frankly, for American audiences, when we think of basketball at its highest level, the Olympics are fun and amusing. You know, Charles Barkley knocking over somebody in '92 is certainly good TV, but it's not the focus for Americans. That's the NBA, that's March Madness, that's college basketball. Other popular American pastimes of the 21st century, NASCAR, UCF. I don't see a foreseeable Olympic future for either of those two. So why are Americans so interested in the Olympics then? What is the deal? They house sports that were once upon a time much more popular with American fans. Track and field, for instance, used to be a huge spectator sport. Not anymore, unfortunately, in the United States at least. They house niche sports in the United States that draw a lot of participants, but just a smattering of fans who aren't members of the family of athletes, you know, swimming, cycling, skiing, skating. Lots of participants, but not very many fans, not good TV ratings normally. But the Olympics also promote sports that outside of Special Olympic time, outside of that fortnight, almost no one in the U.S. is interested in. You know, think about sports like team handball. Have you ever seen it as an American outside of the Olympic venue? Think about badminton, luge, curling, modern pentathlon, biathlon. So in spite of the fact that the Olympics do not foreground the most popular American spectator sports, they still rank as a wildly popular event in our culture. Olympic popularity is most assuredly, the Nielsen ratings tell us, team handball doesn't do well on ESPN outside of the Olympics. It's most assuredly a one-way street. The Olympics make these sports popular for a couple of weeks. Even the most popular sports, some of the most popular sports that the Olympics do broadcast, volleyball and soccer in the U.S., you know, audiences pale for regular season games in MLS or college volleyball games compared to the draw they get at the Olympics. So what accounts for this paradox? We love the Olympics, but it's made up of sports we normally don't pay a lot of attention to. The Olympics also, I think, captivate Americans because they embody another paradox. They simultaneously celebrate human tribalism and human universalism. A lot of people don't like to hear that and think sport and politics should be separate. They never were, they never will be. But the Olympics paradoxically embody both the nation and humanity. They represent, in fact, I think the best modern blend of nationalism and internationalism. The founder of the Olympic movement, Baron Pierre de Coubertin, when he organized them in the late 19th century, talked a lot about internationalism and universalism, and he believed that. But he was a super patriot. He loved France. And part of his reason for restarting the games was to animate France, to energize France. He was both a nationalist and an internationalist. So and think of the modern Olympics. They're relentlessly organized around nations. National teams, national anthems, national medal counts, national comparisons. And Coubertin wanted that. At the same time, they evoke the humanness of all of us. That's the genius of the Olympic Games. They feed both our desire for seeing the common connections between all the world's peoples and letting us put on the red, white, and blue face paint and cheer for the home team. And that's an old American tradition. Rah, rah, ray, USA, AMERICA was not a cheer invented for London in 2012, but a cheer invented for London in 1908. Better still, unlike the World Cup, which crowns just one champion in one sport that a multitude of nations see as their national game, guaranteeing grand disappointment in every corner of the globe, save in one victorious homeland, the Olympics crown a bushel of champions in a diverse array of games that give a multitude of homelands a chance for feel-good celebrations. Sri Lanka does not have to win a boatload of medals. Just a badminton gold or two will suffice. Kenya perceives it wins if it dominates the distance runs. Jamaica and other small nations do not need to rival the U.S. or China in the overall medal count. They could just point to their domination by counting medals on a per capita basis in regards to population. Even superpowers can simultaneously claim victory. Look at China and the U.S. in 2008. If you went to NBC's site, they had the U.S. ranked number 1 based on gold medals. If you went to the Beijing Organizing Committee site, or rather the U.S. based number 1 on overall medals. You went to the Beijing Organizing site for China. China was number 1 on gold medals. So they simultaneously could crow that they were Olympic champions. And the IOC doesn't even recognize the medal count, which makes it all more mysterious in certain ways. So the Olympics create a chaos of results that bests even the cacophony of the recently deceased BCS college football system, which is in some ways a good thing, thereby allowing multiple nations to root for their home teams. In addition, the Olympics have mastered the popular culture truism that limited exposure beats overexposure. They are Greta Garbo to a multitude of Miley Cyruses that crowd the modern global sports scene. Elegant and mysterious, once upon a time 4 years, and every 2 years, rather than crass and omnipresent. And that works for them. Works very well for them. The Olympics are unique and unreplicatable. They are the Citizen Kane of the sports world, uncopyable classics to the multitude of Rockies that mostly populate the contemporary sports landscape. The popular culture industry simply cannot spin off the Olympics. As proof of that claim, I offer the one effort, at least in my lifetime, to copy the Olympics. Ted Turner's Goodwill Games. Remember those? They were nowhere near even a Rocky II effort, let alone a Citizen Kane. So Ted Turner's forgettable scheme to mimic the Olympics brings us to the LA Games in 1984. Staged because the first Goodwill Games were in 1986, 2 years after. This LA Games was staged at a turbulent moment in Olympic history. Turner, the reason he launched the Goodwill Games is he perceived the modern Olympic edifice was crumbling. And so he hatched his scheme to hijack the Olympics in some ways for his own cable television superstation. It was a marketing ploy in part, because he thought the Olympics were tottering toward destruction. From where we sit in 2014, the notion the Olympics are on their way to extinction seems unimaginable. An incredible miscalculation fostered by Turner's enormous egotism. But if you really look at it, on closer inspection, Turner was at that moment spot on in his assessment. The Olympics were in danger of collapsing. During the 1980s, they hovered on the verge of extinction, imperiled by multiple maladies. The maelstroms of global and local politics that rent the 60s and 70s consumed the Olympics and produced a series of cataclysms that very nearly extinguished the Olympic flame. Inside and outside of the stadium at Mexico City, vast geopolitical forces created memorable moments, from black glove fists on medal stands to a massacre downtown. Munich brought another massacre that overshadowed gnawing questions about whether staging the games had become too expensive. Montreal brought more red ink, thankfully a respite from massacres, but more red ink. In addition to violence and economic troubles, various boycotts had swirled through the Mexico City Games, the Munich Games, the Montreal Games, as global politics inevitably intruded, as they always do in the Games. Another boycott then branded the 1980 Moscow Games and threatened to undermine the entire movement. So politically and economically, controversial had the Olympic franchise become that Colorado voters booted the 76 Winter Games out of Denver. Can you imagine a host city doing that today? So dismal had things gotten for the Olympic movement that when Turner staged the Goodwill Games in '86 in Moscow, many hailed him as a visionary and predicted that his made-for-TBS spectacle would supplant the Olympic rival. So troubled had the Olympics become that only 2 cities even bothered to bid for the '84 Games, Los Angeles and Tehran. Internal events that culminated in this 1979 Islamic Revolution pretty much ended Tehran's bid before it even got anywhere. And the IOC was basically left with Los Angeles, a prospect that many in the IOC's doddering old guard, now I know we have an IOC member, so back then that I'm not talking about you, the 70s doddering old guard. They're all gone now, so they can't hunt me down. So the doddering old guard who were then presiding over the unraveling of the Olympic movement, they thought LA would be the nail in the coffin of Coubertin's great symbol. But they didn't have any alternatives, and so it was Los Angeles. Ironically, LA's bid in '84 was driven as much by reflex. This is a city that sought and failed to acquire every Olympic Games from 1952 until it got the 1984 Games, as it was by a conscious desire to rescue the modern games from extinction. As strange as it might seem from where we are now, had that 1984 LA Games drowned in red ink or served as an unwilling venue for another act of terrorism, they might just have been the last Olympics. Given that, one then can plausibly argue that the 1984 Olympics were in fact the single most important games in the movement's history. They have left an enormous legacy. Whether you love or hate Olympic commercialism, LA84 transformed the economic dynamics of the Olympics and made them into the single most sought-after commodity in the world. Whether you love or hate the new generation of telegenic action sports that have invaded the Olympic program, whether you're a flying tomato fan or not, that trend started at LA with windsurfing, the first action sport added to the program. Whether you love or hate the television spectacle that engulfs the contemporary Olympics, LA revolutionized pop culture productions of the Olympics. Whether you love or hate the immersion of the Olympics in politics, LA84 made it clear that competing provided a better platform for nations to project themselves to the world than boycotting. You know, I could spend hours cataloging the fascinating legacies, but you didn't come here to hear me. You came here to hear this dynamic panel, so let's get to that.